3 months I was in absolute diabolical agony. We thought everybody thought I was going to die, you know. To be honest with you, the way I felt, death would have been a welcome gift.
For decades, he was the indestructible Prince of Darkness, the madman who bit the heads off bats and somehow survived a life of unbelievable excess. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a rock star, he was a myth, a legend who seemed like he might actually outlive us all. But the real tragedy of Ozzy Osbourne isn't in the chaos he created. It's in the quiet, heartbreaking battle he's fighting right now, where the man behind the myth is just fighting to get through the day that he was the swaggering frontman for the band that literally invented heavy metal. A guy who lived out every rock and roll cliché, pushed his body and mind to the absolute edge of destruction, and somehow, always managed to stumble back, laughing. We saw him as the lovable, bumbling dad on a reality show that changed celebrity culture forever, and then as the elder statesman of a genre he helped create. But underneath all of it, the chaos, the mountains of cocaine, and the rivers of booze. There was always John Michael Osbourne, an insecure kid from a bombed-out industrial town in England. Today, that kid is a 76-year-old man staring down his own mortality in the cruelest way. The invincible icon is gone, replaced by a man trapped in a body that has completely betrayed him. A debilitating fight with Parkinson's disease, along with the fallout from multiple, life-altering surgeries, has stripped away the persona, revealing the fragile, vulnerable man underneath. This isn't the story of a rock star flaming out in a blaze of glory. It's the story of a slow, painful fade. It's the story of a man who flew so close to the sun for so long, he never thought he'd be grounded so completely. This is the tragedy of Ozzy Osbourne, and it's truly heartbreaking. To really get the man who became the myth, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the screaming stadiums, but to the gray, gritty streets of post-war Aston, Birmingham. Born John Michael Osbourne on December 3, 1948, he was one of 6 kids crammed into a tiny, 2-bedroom house. Life was tough. His dad, Jack, was a toolmaker working grueling night shifts, while his mom, Lillian, worked days at a factory just to keep food on the table. It was a house full of people, but not a lot of affection. Ozzy later said his parents never told him they loved him, it just wasn't something people in their world did. From the start, Ozzy felt like he didn't fit in. At school, he struggled with severe, undiagnosed dyslexia that made learning feel impossible. They labeled him slow, so he became the class clown to hide his insecurities. It was in the schoolyard he got the nickname Ozzy, and it stuck for life. School offered him nothing but a feeling of failure and shame. He felt unclean, like a peasant, a feeling made worse by the family's poverty, where they sometimes used newspapers for toilet paper. The only escape he found was music. When he was 14, he heard the Beatles' "She Loves You," and a switch flipped. He knew right then that he was going to be a rock star, but the path from Aston to the world stage wasn't exactly a straight line. He dropped out of school at 15 and bounced between dead-end jobs, plumber's apprentice, horn tuner in a car factory, even a slaughterhouse worker. Nothing stuck. He was looking for an identity, any way to be seen. In a misguided attempt to fit in with the local toughs, he tried petty crime. By his own admission, he was a terrible burglar. He once tried to steal a TV, only to have it fall on him. Another time, he grabbed a pile of clothes from a shop, not realizing until later they were all for babies. His criminal career ended abruptly when he was caught and fined. His father refused to pay the fine, hoping to teach his son a lesson, and 17-year-old Ozzy was sentenced to 6 weeks in Winson Green prison. The experience was terrifying for a young kid with long hair. But it worked. It taught him one thing: he never, ever wanted to go back. Prison solidified his belief that a normal life, a factory life, wasn't for him. The only thing he cared about was music. After his release, that passion became his mission. He sang in a few local bands without much luck. Then, one day, he put an ad in a music shop: Ozzy Zig needs gig, has own PA. In 1968, that ad was answered by guitarist Tony Iommi and drummer Bill Ward, who were playing with bassist Geezer Butler. The four guys, all from the same working-class neighborhood, formed a blues rock band they called Earth. They played the local pub circuit, but something was missing. The turning point came from an unlikely place. Geezer Butler, a big fan of horror movies, noticed people would pay money to be scared. Inspired by a Boris Karloff movie, he wrote a dark, ominous song called Black Sabbath. The band loved the name and the whole idea. They ditched the name Earth and became Black Sabbath, leaning into a sound that was heavier and darker than anything before it. It was a sound born from the industrial noise of Birmingham, a city filled with the relentless pounding of factories. Tony Iommi, who had lost the tips of 2 fingers in a factory accident, had to tune his guitar down, creating that sludgy, menacing tone that became their signature, with Ozzy's haunting wail over Iommi's monster riffs, Butler's thundering bass, and Ward's crashing drums. They created something completely new. They created heavy metal. In 1970, they released their self-titled debut album, recorded in a single day. The sound was terrifying and intoxicating, and it connected with a generation of kids who felt just as alienated as they did. The madman had found his voice. But as his star rose, the same demons he was running from started pulling him into a new kind of darkness, one he'd spend the rest of his life trying to escape. And that was just the beginning. The 1970s were an absolute whirlwind. Black Sabbath became one of the biggest bands on the planet. Albums like Paranoid, Master of Reality, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath didn't just define a genre, they sold millions. They went from 4 broke kids in Birmingham to global rock gods, and with that fame came an avalanche of money, women, and temptation. For Ozzy, a man already battling deep insecurities, it was a lethal mix. The band that started with a shared love of music soon became, as Ozzy put it, a drugs band dabbling with music. Their lives became a cartoon of rock and roll excess. The stories are the stuff of legend. Cocaine was delivered to their studio in speaker boxes. They reportedly spent more on their drug budget than on recording the actual albums. Their days were a blur of narcotics and booze, fueling a paranoid, isolated world where reality didn't seem to apply. And Ozzy was right at the center of the storm. He wasn't just participating, he was the ringmaster. He built his reputation as the Prince of Darkness, a wild man whose antics were as famous as his voice. The most infamous moment, of course, was the bat incident. During a show in Iowa, a fan threw what Ozzy thought was a rubber bat on stage. As a joke, he picked it up and bit its head off. He found out very quickly it was not a toy. The act, born from a moment of stoned impulsiveness, cemented his public image as a creature of pure chaos. It perfectly symbolized his lifestyle, and the legend of the indestructible madman grew, but behind the headlines and gold records, the band was falling apart. The constant drug and alcohol abuse was taking a serious toll, especially on Ozzy. The brotherhood forged in Aston was fracturing under the weight of egos, paranoia, and addiction. Tony Iommi and Ozzy, in particular, were constantly at each other's throats. The creative spark was being drowned in a sea of chemicals. By the late 70s, the magic was gone. Their 1978 album, Never Say Die, felt tired and uninspired, and the recording process was painful for everyone involved. The final straw came while they were trying to write the next album. The band rented a house in Bel Air, but Ozzy was basically a ghost. While the others were still indulging heavily, Ozzy had reached a point where he just wasn't functioning anymore. He showed almost no interest in the music and was rarely around. Tony Iommi felt they couldn't go on like that and made the gut-wrenching decision. On April 27, 1979, drummer Bill Ward was sent to give Ozzy the news. He was fired from Black Sabbath. The official reason was his unreliability and excessive substance abuse, which had become even worse than the others. Ozzy would later call it hypocritical, saying, "We were all fed up." If you're stoned and I'm stoned and you're telling me that I'm fired because I'm stoned, how can that be? But the decision was made. For Ozzy, it was devastating. He felt like he'd been hit by a ton of bricks. He was cast out from the only world he knew. He checked into a hotel room and went on a 3-month bender, completely convinced his career was over. He was back to being that lost kid from Aston, only now he had enough money to truly destroy himself. The Prince of Darkness had been dethroned, and he was on the verge of total collapse, just when it looked like Ozzy Osbourne was going to be another rock and roll casualty. A figure from his past stepped in. Sharon Arden was the daughter of Black Sabbath's notoriously tough manager, Don Arden. She first met Ozzy when she was 18, working as her dad's receptionist, and probably thought he was a total lunatic. Now, in 1979, her father sent her to LA to look after his investment, to basically manage the wreckage of the man he just fired. Sharon found Ozzy holed up in a hotel room in a drug-fueled stupor. But where everyone else saw a lost cause, she saw the talent buried under all the chaos. She became his manager, his protector, and eventually, his wife. She took charge, fired the band he'd put together, and helped him build a new one around a ridiculously talented young American guitarist named Randy Rhoads. With Sharon's sharp guidance and Rhoads' virtuosic playing, Ozzy's solo career was launched. His first album, Blizzard of Oz, came out in 1980 and was a massive, unexpected hit, thanks to the iconic single, Crazy Train. Ozzy was back, and he was bigger than ever. He had proven he didn't need Black Sabbath. With Sharon by his side, they married on July 4, 1982, he built a new empire. But this new success just poured gasoline on the fire of his addictions. The 80s saw his behavior get even more erratic and dangerous. He was arrested for public intoxication and, most notoriously, got banned from San Antonio for drunkenly urinating on a memorial at the Alamo. He was living the life of a madman, and it seemed like there were no consequences. Then, tragedy struck with a force that would haunt Ozzy for the rest of his life. On March 19, 1982, while on tour in Florida, the band's bus driver took a small plane for a joyride. He buzzed the tour bus a few times, where Ozzy, Sharon, and the rest of the crew were sleeping. On the third flight, he took off with the band's makeup artist and guitarist Randy Rhoads. Rhoads, who had a fear of flying, had only agreed to go so he could take some aerial pictures for his mom. The pilot kept making dangerously low passes over the bus. On the fourth pass, the plane's wing clipped the top of the bus, sending it spiraling into a nearby house where it exploded. All 3 people on board were killed instantly. Ozzy woke up to the sound of the explosion and a scene of unimaginable horror. Randy Rhoads was only 25 years old. He was more than a guitarist to Ozzy, he was a friend, an inspiration, and the musical genius who had resurrected his career. His death shattered Ozzy. It was a loss he never really recovered from, a wound that never healed. The chaos Ozzy had cultivated had finally claimed someone close to him, and the guilt was crushing. Randy's death sent Ozzy into an even deeper spiral of depression and addiction. He kept touring and recording, but he was a man lost in grief. The breaking point finally came in 1989. In a drug and alcohol-fueled blackout, Ozzy attacked Sharon in their home. He later recalled a terrifyingly calm feeling as he told her, "I've decided you have to go," before he started to strangle her. Terrified, Sharon managed to hit a panic button. Ozzy woke up in a jail cell with no memory of what happened. A police officer read him the charge, attempted murder. It was rock bottom. In an incredible act of forgiveness, Sharon chose not to press charges, but on one condition: he had to go to rehab immediately. It was a brutal wake-up call. The Prince of Darkness had almost destroyed the one person who had saved him. The myth of the indestructible man was shattered, revealing a deeply sick man who was a danger to himself and everyone he loved. The long road to recovery was about to begin, but his body was keeping score of all the years of abuse, and that bill was about to come due. The 90s and early 2000s brought an unexpected new chapter for Ozzy. He began the long, hard journey to sobriety, and while there were relapses, he was genuinely trying to change. He kept putting out successful albums and launched Ozzfest in 1996, a hugely popular festival that cemented his status as the godfather of heavy metal. But the biggest surprise came in 2002, when the world met a side of Ozzy no one had ever seen on the MTV reality show, The Osbournes. The show, following the daily chaos of Ozzy, Sharon, and their kids Jack and Kelly, became a cultural phenomenon. It turned Ozzy from the fearsome Prince of Darkness into a lovable, mumbling patriarch who couldn't figure out the TV remote. The show made him a bigger star than ever, but it also showed his vulnerabilities. His slurred speech and shaky hands were often played for laughs, but it was later suggested they were partly due to prescription drugs he was taking to manage his anxiety after Sharon's cancer diagnosis. Just as his public image softened, his life was violently turned upside down again. On December 8, 2003, while riding an ATV on his English estate, he had a horrific accident. He flipped the vehicle, and it landed on top of him. The injuries were catastrophic: a broken collarbone, 8 fractured ribs, and a crushed vertebra in his neck. He was rushed into emergency surgery, and his bodyguard had to resuscitate him twice at the scene. He later said, "The bloody thing nearly killed me. I am lucky to be here today and not paralyzed." That accident was the beginning of the end of his physical invincibility. It was the first in a string of health disasters that would define the final act of his life. The surgery to repair his neck required inserting metal rods, a temporary fix for a problem that would haunt him forever. And all the while, a silent enemy was advancing inside his own body. In 2020, Ozzy publicly revealed that he was battling Parkinson's disease. He later clarified that he'd been diagnosed back in 2003 with Parkin, a specific genetic form of the disease, but had kept it private for years. Parkinson's is a progressive disorder that slowly destroys motor control. For Ozzy, it meant tremors, stiffness, and a loss of balance. He described it as feeling like he's walking around with lead boots on. His health problems started to cascade. A fall at home in 2019 dislodged the metal rods in his spine, causing agonizing nerve pain and requiring even more surgeries. He described the pain as so intense that at one point, he prayed he wouldn't wake up. This led to a bout of severe depression. One surgery seemed to lead to another. In 2023, he had his 4th major spinal surgery, an operation that also revealed a tumor in one of his vertebrae that had to be removed. The surgeries left him, in his own words, crippled. The man who once commanded the world's biggest stages could no longer walk without help. The physical toll made his career as a touring musician impossible. In February 2023, he made the heartbreaking announcement that he was retiring from touring, admitting his body just couldn't handle it anymore. The road, his home for over 50 years, was closed to him forever. The indestructible force of nature had finally been stopped, not by drugs or booze, but by the slow, relentless betrayal of his own body. The tragedy was no longer about the chaos he created, but about the stillness that had been forced on him. The story of Ozzy Osbourne has always been about survival. He survived poverty and neglect. He survived prison. He survived decades of drug and alcohol abuse that killed so many of his friends. He survived being fired from his own band, the tragic death of his best friend, and a near-fatal ATV accident. For so long, it felt like his defining feature was his refusal to die. But this final chapter is different. This isn't a battle he can win with sheer willpower. The Parkinson's is progressive. The damage to his spine is permanent. The pain is chronic. His wife Sharon, his rock for over 40 years, has confirmed that while his voice is still strong, the disease has taken a severe toll, leaving his mobility permanently impaired. He talks about his health with a stark honesty. "I can't walk much now," he said. He's even reflected on his own mortality, guessing that, at best, he has about 10 years left. The tragedy of Ozzy Osbourne is this cruel irony: after a lifetime spent daring fate to do its worst, his final fight is a quiet, slow-moving siege against his own body. The Prince of Darkness, the ultimate symbol of rock rebellion, now fights for the simple dignity of walking, for a day free from pain. The myth has been stripped away, and all that's left is the man, fragile and mortal, yet, even now, his spirit is still there. "For all my complaining, I'm still alive," he has said, a flash of that old defiance. And it looks like there's one last goodbye to be said. In July 2025, Ozzy Osbourne is scheduled to take the stage one last time in his hometown of Birmingham, reuniting with the original members of Black Sabbath for a final farewell show. Sharon calls it the one thing he feels he needs to do, to say a proper thank you and goodbye to the fans and the city that made him. He admits he won't be able to do a full set, but he'll join his bandmates for a final bow, a full stop on an epic, world-changing story. His legacy is already secure. He's the godfather of a genre, a two-time Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and an icon whose influence spans generations. But maybe his truest legacy is just in his resilience. His life has been a long, crazy train ride, full of incredible highs and devastating lows. And as he prepares for his final curtain call, trapped in a body that has failed him but with a spirit that won't surrender, the heartbreaking tragedy of Ozzy Osbourne is also a profound story of the will to just keep going. If you found this story as compelling as we did, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the lives of music's most iconic figures. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.